Welcome to What's What with Heather Harris, the podcast for the fiercely hopeful. Here, we explore the lesser-known innovations, overlooked ideas, and hidden forces quietly shaping our human experience. I'm your host, Heather Harris. Let's find out what's what. I was reminded recently of the powerful impact of an unexpected kindness. I was a passenger on a pleasure cruise that was headed out on Loch Katrine in beautiful central Scotland. It was a gorgeous day, not a cloud in the sky. But among the tourists boarding the ship that day was a child who seemed to be quite apprehensive and even afraid. He was in tears, and his parents were doing their best to reassure him. The crew had their hands full. It was a very full excursion, and we were starting to run slightly behind schedule as we all waited to see if this little guy would rally and come aboard. Instead of being bothered by the restless passengers, some of whom were clearly getting impatient to get out onto the water, the captain, a large man bedecked in his official finery, instead turned his attention to this child. He didn't condescend to him, he didn't try to placate him, but he very matter-of-factly explained the safety and security measures that they observed each and every time the boat left the dock, and he offered to show the boy the bridge once they set sail. Somehow, he convinced this child to climb aboard. He was still anxious, he had one hand in each of his parents, but I think his worries had been heard. And not an hour later, he was beaming ear to ear after having driven the boat under the captain's watchful eye. This experience reminded me of the legacy of kindness that can stretch across a lifetime, often offered by unexpected people, and sometimes those people are more deserving than we may be even ourselves. Father James Martin has written a memoir that reminds us of the impact of simple acts of kindness. But this is just one takeaway from this entertaining and insightful read. Father Martin is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large at America Magazine, author of numerous best-selling books. He's a speaker, a retreat leader, and one of the most widely recognized Catholic voices in the world today. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, very esteemed institution, and worked in the corporate world at General Electric. By all conventional measures, he was a success. Yet in his late 20s, he felt drawn toward a different path, one that eventually led him to join the Jesuits, a religious order known for its intellectual rigor, discernment, education, and service. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Jesuits, they're known for finding God in all things. Their spiritual tradition encourages people to pay attention, to notice where meaning really resides, where the divine might be present, and where compassion is being called forth in everyday life. And I think Father Martin's work reflects all of this. Over the years, he has written extensively about prayer, spirituality, saints, discernment, joy, grief, and what it means to live a meaningful life. And while his work is rooted in Catholic spirituality, what makes it resonate so broadly is that the questions he explores are fundamentally human. How do we find purpose? How do we cope with uncertainty? How do we connect with one another? Those questions feel particularly meaningful right now. We live in a time of extraordinary connection and extraordinary division. We can communicate instantly with someone on the other side of the world, yet many people are reporting that they are feeling lonelier than ever. We have access to limitless information, yet compassion and understanding sometimes feel in short supply. We are increasingly encouraged to sort ourselves into tribes, categories, and identities, often judging one another before we've even had a conversation. This recent experience that I had on that steamship in central Scotland led me to ask a somewhat familiar question. What if we approached one another with greater kindness? We don't have to agree or share the same worldview, but we do need to be aware that every person carries a story that we might not fully understand. Father Martin's latest book, Work in Progress, speaks to this in a genuine and authentic voice from his own lived experience. And he has lived some life. But as his latest memoir's title indicates, he acknowledges that he, too, is still a work in progress. There's humility in acknowledging that growth is truly lifelong. When we recognize our own imperfections, it becomes a little easier to extend grace to someone else. Today, we'll talk about Father Martin's life, his journey from his teenage years to the corporate world, to the priesthood, and the lessons he's learned through decades of ministry through the lens of his latest book. And also why kindness may be far more powerful and far more transformative than we often realize. We chat about faith, growth, humanity, and the beautiful reality that none of us have finished becoming. This is my conversation with Father James Martin. Thank you so much for joining me today, Father Martin. I am thrilled to speak with you because I just finished your book, Work in Progress, which had me actually taking a little bit of a nostalgic path into my own childhood jobs and experiences, but it also did make me laugh. So thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be invited on the show. Glad you enjoyed it. I think I'm a little older than you, but I appreciate the nostalgia reference.
Not by much. I had very similar jobs in my childhood and early adulthood. So why did you feel that now is the time to write this memoir through the lens of those jobs that you held as you were developing and forming and growing into an adult?
Well, it's a funny story. I'm a Jesuit priest, as you know, and I'm also a writer here at America Magazine. And my last two books were on some serious topics. The last one before Work in Progress was called Come Forth. It was about the raising of Lazarus, a story in the New Testament. Pretty heavy. I mean, it was joyful, but it was pretty heavy. And the book before that was called Learning to Pray, which was about prayer in everybody's life. Not sad or anything, but, pretty serious. And I started writing these stories about my summer jobs just to kind of get a break. And they were so much fun to write. I sent them to my publisher and I said, what do you think? And she said, wisely, you can't just write a book of funny summer jobs. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, people are going to want a little bit more from you. And so she said, if you extend it through your working adult life, after I graduated from business school, I went to General Electric and into the Jesuits. It can be kind of a vocation story. So I see it as kind of two parts. It's finding work as a teenager and then finding God as an adult.
Yeah. And there were moments, I think, in your youth too, where there were glimpses of God as well, as you discover in your book.
Yeah, there are. I think the key for me is inviting the reader to sort of look over his or her life and say, what are the experiences that I had that, might be funny and charming and nostalgic, but also that might have pointed out where God was at work. And it was really only when I was an adult that I was able to look back and say, gosh, I think that really was a moment of God's reaching out to me.
Mm-hmm. Moments of reflection. So the phrase work in progress, the title, feels very theological. It really does, but also deeply human. So why did you pick this title for your memoir?
Yeah, you're the first one to ask me directly about the title, and it was kind of a fun thing. I have a Facebook page, a public Facebook page, Father James Martin, S.J., and we have every Friday's faith sharing and Bible study, which is this group of about 300 people that anybody can join. And I said to them, what do you think would be a good title for this book? One of the early versions was Misspent Youth, which was kind of funny. But my publisher said, that's going to sound like you regret everything, so you don't want that. So I had a couple different ones. And someone suggested Work in Progress, and I thought, boy, that works on so many levels. First of all, I am a work in progress. Second of all, we are all works in progress, really. Mm-hmm. And third of all, it is the story of the progression of my work. So these are different works in progress. So I picked that, and then I picked a kind of fun, long subtitle, Confessions of a Busboy, Dishwasher, Usher, Caddy, Factory Worker, Bank Teller, Corporate Tool, and Priest, which I loved. I love long subtitles because they make people laugh. And so that's the title and the subtitle of the book. That's where they came from.
That's fantastic. And it was very eye-catching, which is why I picked up your book, because I thought, who is this guy who has done all of these crazy things? So as you say, you've held a variety of jobs before becoming a Jesuit priest. What did these earlier jobs of your youth teach you about humanity?
Well, about humanity and humility. They taught me about my own humanity, which is that I'm not perfect. And the first story is I'm a 15-year-old busboy at an ice cream parlor, and I make all sorts of mistakes. And I think it was a real invitation to humility. It's also an invitation to learn certain job lessons that I talk about throughout the book. Ask when you don't know how to do something, apologize when you make a mistake, be kind, listen. But also, as I say in the book, there were a couple occasions when you're a 15-year-old busboy, a 16-year-old caddy, or a 17-year-old movie theater usher, when you're treated pretty poorly. I mean, you have very little power. You're on the low end of the job ladder. And, being treated poorly and being humiliated, sometimes made for funny stories, kind of some, screw ups that I did. But it was just as effective as a year's worth of homilies about being kind to people, because I remember thinking at 15 and being humiliated and yelled at when I was a busboy, I will never treat anyone this way in my life. I mean, that just sort of cured me immediately from any desire, not that I'm a mean person, but any desire to kind of lash out at somebody who's in a service position or any position, particularly someone who's younger. So I learned a lot about being kind, or rather not being mean.
Yeah, and I think that's a lesson that a lot of people still need to learn. And also, I think you mentioned, I'm not sure if you mentioned it in the book or an interview maybe that I've watched, that people who are in these service positions, whether young or old, they are kindness themselves. Sometimes the things that they do or can do for us really exemplify kindness.
Yeah, I think that they can go out of their way to be kind to us if we're having a hard day. If you're going to whatever, Starbucks or something, and the barista is kind to you, it can really lift your spirits. And by the same token, these are people who often have very little, in the human interaction, power, right? The old idea that customer's always right means that the customer can yell at you, and you really can't yell back unless you want to lose your job. So they're doing it to people who really, often can't repay them. I mean, sometimes you get tips, but there's a kind of kindness on that end too. But really, the lesson I learned was just not to be mean to people, and not to humiliate people, and not to make people feel small, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. There's a lot of that going on today. People feel they have the right to do that.
That's right. And I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe it's, we're so individualistic. And we think that our worth is dictated by our wealth and that we can treat people that way. But it's definitely a lesson that we all need to pay attention to. When we're reflecting on our own youth, sometimes we're not very kind to ourselves, right? We look at our mistakes and our flaws, our weaknesses, and we feel shame. Were there parts of your earlier self that you met again with more compassion?
Yeah, I tell this story. Look, when I was young, a young man in college, especially, I drank a lot and smoked a lot of pot. And, I put in one or two of my escapades because I thought, look, this is who I am and this is part of my story. And it was very funny. I had a couple more, and my publisher said, I think one or two is enough. So,
you don't want to lay it all out there. Father
yeah,
Martin.
Exactly. Nothing criminal, but just, some really kind of crazy stuff. And I say in the book, I talk about a kind of a notably debauched 19th or 20th birthday party that I had, that I look back on it with a sense of compassion, and that I invite people to say, when you're looking back in yourself, consider yourself the way you would look at a 16-year-old or 15-year-old today, which is a lot of compassion. Someone who's trying to find his or her own identity and place in the world, and to have some forgiveness. By the same token, I think it's good to kind of learn lessons, and say, for example, in the book, I was always apologizing reflexively. Oh, sorry, basically to get people to like me and to sort of approve of me. And I remember in one chapter in the book, I talk about apologizing for collecting money for a newspaper. I'm sorry, I'm asking for money because the newspaper was kind of free and you would ask for donations. I'm sorry. And my dad said, what are you apologizing for? You're asking them for a donation and they can say no. You don't have to apologize. So we can look back and be compassionate on ourselves, but I also think we can look back and learn lessons. And that's what I try to do that in the book. I try to kind of share life lessons that I've learned to make the book kind of a helpful takeaway for people as well.
And I think you definitely achieved that.
Thank you.
Achieved that. We've kind of touched on this, but many of us struggle with our self-worth, and we connect it to whatever role we're playing in society. Why are these two aspects of self so tightly intertwined? Is there a way to tease that apart?
Yeah, great question. Well, Pope Leo just published an encyclical for those who aren't Catholic, which is kind of a circular letter to everybody in the world about artificial intelligence. And one of the things he said was, which I love, he said that one of the most insidious sort of philosophies is this idea that we are what we produce, we are what we do, right? And, for people who might be not able to do things sort of in an active way, maybe they're retired or maybe they're ill or maybe they're disabled, right? For a number of reasons, they can feel less than. They can feel that they're not, we say a productive member of society.
Right.
And so I think, when you are what you do, or when you think you are what you do, when you're not doing anything, you feel like you're nothing, or if you're unemployed. I put a quote from Pope Leo on my Instagram account just last night, and I quoted him, and the quote is really beautiful about this ideology that we are what we do. And a mother of an autistic child wrote in and said, "Thank you very much for this, because my son, in a sense, doesn't quote unquote do anything in terms of, working outside the home, but he does a lot in terms of showing love." And it really helped me to sort of be at peace with that. So I think we're such a, active oriented society, which is good. I mean, you got to get stuff done. But when you say to people, you're not valuable unless you're doing something or making something or producing something, it really goes against everybody's inherent dignity, right? I mean,
Yes.
a person who's the most busy person in the world has just as much dignity as someone who's, on their deathbed and coming to the end of their lives.
Absolutely. That is definitely something that I hope everybody hangs their hat on when listening.
My novice director used to say, this is one of my favorite lines, we're human beings, not human doings. And we have to remember that.
Human beings, not human doings.
That's right.
I love it. Your memoir emphasizes becoming or evolving, work in progress, rather than the expectation of perfection. What does that mean to you as a faith leader? And is there a lesson there for other faith leaders?
Right. I think that we're all imperfect. You and me, and even the Pope and the Dalai Lama and whatever religious leader you look at. Now, I mean, we can see certainly scandals that show us that in really dramatic ways, right? That, oftentimes our religious leaders, our leaders and just our friends and people everywhere have feet of clay, right? To use an old image. But I think, in a less dramatic way, to just say to yourself, I am a work in progress. I'm not perfect. There was a cheesy 1970s poster that used to hang behind people's desks. And it was, "Be patient with me. God's not finished with me yet." Right. Which I kind of liked. It's kind of cheesy, but a lot of these cheesy posters actually have a lot of wisdom. And so to say to yourself, we're in process, it's a balance. We're loved as we are by God, right? We're loved children of God. That's what I believe. But we're also invited to become the people we're meant to be and become, in a sense, more compassionate, more loving, more generous, really more holy. So it's a tension. You don't want to say I'm terrible, and I need to change because I'm terrible. But you also can't say, well, that's it. I'm perfectly,
I'm done.
I'm done. Right? Yeah,
I've achieved all. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're Jesus or Mary or the Buddha or
right.
There's a way to go. So we're all works in progress, and it's having a little compassion on yourself and saying, even at an advanced age, I can still learn and still change.
Absolutely, I firmly believe in that. So, what would you say to someone whose life has not unfolded as they hoped? Someone who perhaps had higher aspirations for their own work here on earth?
I get that a lot, and I think it's a really important question because I think sometimes we can do a number on people unintentionally about saying we all have a vocation, we all want to fulfill our vocations and what are we meant to do. And sometimes people are unable to do that for a number of reasons, because of education, because of just lack of opportunity. I mean, if you're going into a bad job market, because of disabilities of different kinds, all sorts of things, cultural reasons, right? And so what do we do? The first thing to do is, I think, is to recognize that and not pretend it's not happening, right? I mean, when I worked on a factory floor as a teenager, these were not people who felt like this is my highest vocation. I love this work. There's a couple of ways to look at it. I think the first way is to say, are there aspects of your job that you can find joy in? For example, and most commonly, the other people.
Right.
The people I work with, the people I'm friends with, the people who support me. The second is, can you look at your job as something that's contributing to a higher good, right? I worked in a pill packaging plant that, we were making stuff that is going to help people in terms of their healthy lives. And then also, can you look at it from the point of view of, I'm making money to support my family, which is a good thing. But it is true. I think that's a part of the spiritual life that we tend to underplay because it's all about, fulfill your vocation, and your vocation is where your gifts meet the world's greatest needs, which sounds nice, but sometimes people are unable to do that. I mean, if your gift is you're an opera singer and you can't get a job as an opera singer, like, what do you do?
Yeah.
So I think it's those three things. I think it's finding joy in the people you work with. I think it's sort of seeing yourself as part of a higher cause. And then third, I think it's saying I'm providing, for something which is good, which is my family or even my own upkeep.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are all very, very worthy things.
Yeah. And every work has dignity. Every work has dignity.
Every work has dignity, no matter what. So what do grace and hope look like while we're all still becoming? We've talked of a few examples where we aren't sometimes as graceful as we could be.
Yeah.
But these are troubled times. People are feeling a little uncertain, a little perhaps negative.
Well, one of my favorite definitions of grace comes from the Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner. You're going to love this, which is, grace is God's self-communication, which I love.
My.
Yeah, so grace is really God sort of participating in our lives. And I think the invitation to grace is to see it everywhere, is to really pay attention and to say, where do I feel God's grace? Where do I feel God's presence, God's help, in a sense? And so it's part of it is looking for it, being aware of it, noticing it, taking it seriously that God is going to help me. God wants you to not only make good decisions, but God's going to help you make good decisions through different parts of your life. Sometimes interior movements, where you feel drawn to something, but also sometimes friends helping you, right? Like saying, Heather, I think you should do this, or Jim, I think you should do this. You say, oh, that's really helpful. Well, to see that as kind of a moment of grace. In terms of hope, as a Christian, I really focus a lot on the resurrection. I don't know how many Christian viewers are listening, but when you think about the disciples on Good Friday or Holy Saturday, they're terrified. They think nothing good can happen. Nothing can change. And hope is really kind of a move against despair, which says that nothing can change. And I'll give you a small example. And this is not to get, too super religious, but people say, oh, nothing can ever change. We're stuck. Well, a year ago, people thought there will never be an American Pope. Never.
Exactly.
Never.
Yeah.
Ever, ever, ever. And, guess what?
Here we are.
He comes out on the balcony, and I'll tell you a funny story. There's a Jesuit priest I know who is also a Catholic historian. He teaches Catholic history, and he told me this funny story, which I can say I actually repeated to the Pope when I met with him.
Wow.
He said, I tell my classes, I don't know everything about the future, but there are two things that I do know. One, there will never be a Jesuit Pope. Two, there will never be an American Pope. And he said, I don't mind being proven wrong, but I do mind being proven wrong twice in a row. And the Pope said to me, I guess I can say this, well, I would have taken that bet too. That there would be an American Pope. So when we think about hope, we think about how things can always change.
Always.
And that's really the message of the resurrection for me too.
I love that. So for my listeners, you have not just this book that we discussed today, Work in Progress, but many, many good, some of them more deep and heavy, but definitely worthwhile. Where can my listeners find your work? Where can they follow you?
Sure. I was laughing because I thought you were going to say some of them better than others, some of them not so good.
I haven't read them all yet, so I can't say.
That's right. So to begin with, Work in Progress is available in print, as an ebook, also as an audiobook that I read. And as they say, you can get them anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your bookstore, Goodreads, all those kinds of places. Spotify, Audible. I'll tell you something funny. If you Google my name, James Martin, and Work in Progress, a website will come up. It's one or two down on Google. That is a website for the book that also has a playlist for the book.
Get out.
Yes, on Spotify. It's really something.
Definitely downloading.
It is so much fun. And, as I sort of go through these summer jobs, as we all know, during the summer, there are these songs that are playing that kind of are earworms. And so the publisher created a playlist with all the songs that I mentioned in the book, which was kind of fun.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is brilliant. Because as I was reading your book, I had all of these tunes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I will definitely put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And you're on Instagram and Facebook?
Yes, I'm on Instagram as James Martin SJ, Society of Jesus, as well as on TikTok, Twitter, and on Facebook. I'm under Father James Martin SJ. I'm pretty easy to find on social media.
Okay, you're a busy guy. You're a busy
guy.
But maybe you will come back and speak to me again, I hope.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, this has been fabulous. I encourage everybody to read this book. It is a laugh, but there are a lot of lessons within. It's just been such a pleasure.
My pleasure, too. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining me on What's What with Heather Harris. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, rate, and share the show. It helps others find their way here, because the more the merrier. The future is something that we influence and imagine together. I'm Heather Harris, and until next time, stay curious and stay fiercely hopeful.